that introduction, and I do miss working with the UCA&R staff. I miss seeing the master gardeners come in. My desk was right near where they would all come in and fill up their baskets and all their activities, and they would hang out with my dog, and it was such a lovely office environment. But I've been with the county now for about a year, and I'm really liking it. Um, and we serve the unincorporated areas of the county. So my presentation will talk a lot about sort of if I'm relating to things in terms of regulations and what we're doing, it'll be really focused on what's going on at the unincorporated level, and I'll try to distinguish that. And just to share, like I've been doing this kind of environmental education work for like 30 years, so um, I hope I don't, yammer on too much. So I don't think we're going to do the 10-minute break in between, but basically the first thing we're going to do is we're really going to try to dive into defining what is food loss versus food waste. And we're going to look at the causes and consequences. We're going to look at some of the laws that are driving this. And then we're going to get into what I like to call the composting gospel. And in the honor of Olympics, we're going to have the gardeners. Gardeners are going to go get the gold and have their quiz at the end. So that's the plan for the presentation. So radically inefficient food system. This is not my word. These are not my words. These are words from a woman who is with ReFed, which is a large food policy think tank that is actually has the ear of the local government or the national government, and they're making policy and they're providing lots of information. And when I first got into this field, it was back in 2015, and there was a report from Natural Resources Defense Council from an author, Dana Gunders, at the time. She's now the director of ReFed. And I think that for me was the first time I really heard about that 40% food waste statistic, if anyone's ever heard that. And it was the first time that I ever really seen it quantified. And so I just want to make a distinction here because we do have an ag, sort of audience. We are an ag county, and there's a difference between loss and waste. So food loss occurs typically at the farm and leading up to distribution, so manufacturing and all of that. Food loss in many cases is unavoidable. It's unintentional. It happens on the farm for a variety of reasons. It could be market fluctuations, it could be weather events, it could be a whole variety of situations. The reason why we have loss on the farm. And it represents about 30%, which is, into manufacturing, about 30% of total food waste, food waste and loss. Um, is it avoidable? Could it be improved? Yes, and thankfully that's why we have a University of California system and UCA&R that really is working on some amazing research to keep our food system resilient and maybe improve efficiencies. When we flip over to the consumer side and over to the consumer and retail businesses side, that's where we're seeing the bulk of the waste. And in fact, consumers waste nearly 50%, according to data, of the food that they purchase. Dana Gunders likens it to going to the grocery store, buying 2 bags of groceries, walking out into the parking lot and literally dropping one and leaving it. And it's just, it's something we really need to look at in our society. Now, let's just look at this from a perspective of a plate of French fries, right? So if you think about how we get a plate of French fries to a consumer, first of all, you need all the natural inputs that we have on our planet, right? All the natural capital, soil, water, air, all of that to grow that potato. Then you need the built environment, all those investments. Think about it: equipment, roads, utilities, machinery, cooling, transportation, all of that stuff. Then we talk about human capital. You got to have the workers, from the farmer to the cook, to the sellers, the distribution, the retail side of that. So those French fries finally end up in the hand of the consumer. And according to the data, we're wasting 40% of it. So that's one of the major issues in our radically inefficient food system. Also, what we have is we have a food system that is that expands the globe. And most of our food probably travels more than most average Americans, about 1,500 miles or more. And I know it's an older study, but there is a study from UCSB from the late 90s that I like to cite. And they looked at food production out of the Santa Barbara region. And what they found is that less than 1% of the food produced in the region stays in the region. It goes into the global food supply chain. And in fact, California and the US, we export typically raw product and we import typically processed or packaged foods. And we are importing more than we are exporting. And I think that this is a fascinating discussion right now because of tariffs and everything that we're hearing about in the news. It's quite relevant. So that's part of the issue too. I wanted to share, you know what I'm going to do? I have links to share, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get them, but what we'll do is I'll share, I have source links for everything that I'm citing, and I can put it in the chat afterwards if you guys are interested in following up. So there's one idea of food hubs, the idea of regional food hubs. And that would be connecting, farmers at a very small scale, shortening that supply chain and getting really in relationships between farmers and local consumers, institution, retailers. It's a more sustainable vision for a food system. By shortening that supply chain, we're strengthening those community ties. I hear people talk about it. There's a farmer in the county, Phil McGrath, I think, who has talked about this. I've seen him speak about this. And what we have here in our region is a lack of processing capabilities. What he talked about is he was hand strapped with permitting that he's not able to really invest in his own personal property to create like even a simple processing where they could wash the carrots and bag the carrots right on site. That means we could keep more carrots here. Duda Farms is actually an example of this in a way. They have the capacity here in our county. They harvest their celery and then they process the celery in the county. And so it's just an idea of figuring out ways to shorten our supply chain is one of the opportunities that we have. So all of this food waste results in tons of environmental, economic, and social consequences. About 26% of our landfills is organic waste. So I actually have, yeah, about 26% of the landfill capacity is filled up with organic waste. And when it decomposes anaerobically, that is without oxygen, because if you think about a landfill, it is intentionally compacted. There is no air, there's no water in there. There's not a way for that organic material to decompose. So it anaerobically breaks down and produces methane, which is a greenhouse gas like carbon, but it's 80 times more potent and it's short-lived. So think about it. It's coming out fast and furious, and carbon sort of lingers through the atmosphere. And because that methane is a major driver of a lot of this escalating extreme weather events, and it acts so quickly in the atmosphere, it would be really smart of us. It would behoove us. It's one of the fastest and most effective strategies to slow global warming. All of this food waste also contributes to economic loss. I mean, 2.5 trillion globally is estimated to be lost in food waste. Again, when we're talking about tariffs and increased costs in all of our household groceries and so on and so forth, it comes down to saying that a household may experience $1,000 to $1,500 more a year in just losses alone. Moreover, it's taking up that valuable and shrinking landfill space. We need that capacity. Um, and so that's an issue. And then on top of it, total that methane or all those greenhouse gas emissions that are coming out of our landfills are contributing to 6% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. It impacts ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are like what nature does for us. It's like wetlands cleaning water. It's like forests cleaning air. It's like how in Natalie's presentation, how she talked about green spaces actually mitigate urban heat effects, right? So we're losing ecosystem services as a result of this food waste and the methane emissions. And then we have a 22% freshwater demand. So we talked about freshwater in the last presentation. It's striking to see that nearly a quarter of our fresh water is being impacted also by this. So we do know also that the type of food and where it is grown influences its sort of greenhouse gas or environmental footprint, right? Beef obviously tends to be one of the larger emissions emitters, uh, you know, by far and away larger than like growing a patch of blueberries. And so then someone would argue and say, well, maybe a plant-rich diet is the best way we could go, but that's not necessarily the answer either. There's so many variables, including these food miles and retail practices and all the environmental inputs, um, that make even meat alternatives in comparison to livestock. There's so much information out there. So it's not necessarily one or the other. It really does come down to wasting less, putting less in the landfill. So emissions impact human activity, environmental quality, and our economy. In simplest terms, human activity, including food production, distribution, disposal, it all contributes to environmental emissions. While at the same time, other sectors are producing their own emissions, rising global temperatures, disrupting natural weather systems. And guess what? That's a feedback loop because then that affects the efficiency of food production. So they're bumping into each other and they're reinforcing each other. So production contributes to emissions from fertilizer production, farm machinery, irrigation, transport. Food waste means wasted resources. It means wasted resources. That embedded energy that went into producing that French fry all gets lost. That those emissions um, accelerate unnatural weather phenomenon like atmospheric rivers, hotter temperatures, longer droughts, more extreme weather. Those environmental stressors then contribute, impact food production, inefficiencies, degrade soil health, fertility, organic matter, so on and so forth. And then that declining soil productivity forces farmers to use more synthetic inputs, which then, again, produces an indirect impact. So all of this is really is being driven by the need to produce food, but that based off of what we're wasting, that 40% that is going into that ends up contributing to landfill capacity. So what types of foods are commonly wasted? I think that's pretty much an obvious one. We have produce and prepared and packaged foods, dairy, eggs, the dry goods. By far and away, about 60% of the food that we are seeing wasted regularly is produce and prepared and packaged foods. Meats and frozen foods, they tend not to be wasted as much because they actually can go down into a different stream. We're going to talk about in a little bit about the donation and recovery stream. And there's also this concept of there's actually a psychological strategy marketers use called illusion of abundance. They do this both with this packing our grocery store stalls and our farmers market stalls with really packing it with produce because literally there is something in our psyche that is afraid of scarcity. We don't want to see that. And so they capitalize on that psychology. We've got things like, brand protections and packaging and branding strategies that create all of this waste. We've got inventory practices or sort of back of the house kind of activities, staff turnover, lack of awareness, and it's always this is always how it's been done. We're doing it the way we've always done it. Confusing date labels, which actually is getting addressed by Assembly Bill 660, but those date labels were never standardized. Best by, sell by, all of that. So now they're going to try to standardize those. And if you think about it, the food system is a profit-driven system. It's intended to make money. So it drives consumer behaviors and consumers have their own expectations. I mean, I know personally, I'm not going to pay full price for an apple that has a big bruise in it. So, and then moreover, this is the thing that's crazy. Our fridge size, portion size, and plate size has on average increased 30% since the 70s. I find that to be pretty amazing. But I don't want to fill the space with doom and gloom. Never fear. Our time to talk about compost is nearly here. So it's true that I think as an individual or communities, we can feel stuck in like a broken system. I've personally become weary of being too dependent on these systems that I feel like they're overwhelming. I feel like a puppet and I get caught up in all the strings. But think also about how much we've isolated ourselves from the natural world in general. We're in our offices, we're in our schools, we're in our cars, kids, elderly. When do they get a chance to go out and touch grass? And we know that social science has shown us and taught us that um, it's good for us to go outdoors to get our hands dirty, right? Well, there's Shinrin-yoku and there's forest bathing, right? Just 20 minutes outside in nature can change our social emotional well-being. So we know that it's good for us. And so I've come up with this concept of the compost gospel, because I do believe if you believe it's like a metaphor for life. And it proposes in a way that compost it can process our negative experiences, stuff that we no longer want to hold on to, and transform it into something positive, like patience and wisdom, rather than trying to make things quickly disappear like we do with our waste stream just for convenience. It's deliberate, it's steadfast, we got to get away from it. But think of like a way of a process where we're being involved in the transformation, something that teaches us that there's wisdom in endings, and every ending marks a new beginning, and there's time in between that we need to make that transformation. And so while it's a scientific thing and while it's a gardening thing, for me, it's also a philosophy. Like in this world where we're like consumerism drives so much, the sheer overwhelming reality of like what we're facing in terms of, global weather events and, the economy and everything. Plenty of things to freak out over, right? um, but I feel like when someone commits to gardening and backyard composting, they get to take some agency and some control over how they impact the earth and the environment around them. They get to choose how they're showing up in society, how they choose to define prosperity in a way. So I feel like compost gives the average consumer some leverage and their own version of prosperity that they get to determine. So the laws, SB 1383 is the biggest law. It's the landmark law. In the 90s, we had AB 939, which in the state of California is the reason why we have commodity recycling, right? That's how that got started. So that was the first landmark law. And here we are. What is that? 30 years later, we're looking at 2021. This went in. I guess it's a little bit. SB 1383 came in and it's requiring that a 75% reduction in food landfilled by 2025 and to recover 20% of edible food by 2025. Now, California has met the 20% edible food recovery target largely because surplus food at the retail and distribution level is abundant. It's relatively easy. It's the low-hanging fruit, sort of say. And gratefully, we have a wonderful Feeding America Food Bank, Food Share in our county, who, along with their pantry network, rescues produce from what we call Tier 1 food generators. They're mostly like the grocery stores. And they're rescuing tons and tons of food and getting it through their pantry network to people who need it. So that's been successful for the most part for the state. There's another tier two generators that are going to be more of that the processed and packaged food and that prepared foods. And it's really coming out of like institutions, catering businesses, food establishments. It's going to be more challenging to rescue that food, believe me, and that's where they're starting their efforts. But there's partnerships like Waste Free VC, which is a collaboration among all the cities, and the county is spearheading that effort. And there's an app that they're going to use called Careit, Careit. Again, I'll put links for this stuff in the chat. And it's starting, all of these are starting to ramp up and make some headway into the edible food recovery space. But like I said, the state is being pretty successful in that capacity. But now, in contrast, we've not been very successful in meeting that 75% organic waste reduction target because post-consumer food waste is hard. It's really hard to prevent and divert because once the food reaches those households or the restaurants or the institutions, it becomes scattered and contaminated and deeply tied to individual behavior. So post-consumer waste reduction really depends on behavior change, convenience, providing convenience and infrastructure. So that's why part of the law requires this universal organic collection and clear sorting rules and enforcement. All of this is going to take time to build and normalize. So to reiterate that, like retail level surplus is a supply side efficiency and household level waste is a social and logistical problem. So in the county, we've got different haulers. We've got different jurisdictions, and they all have different agreements with these haulers based on how the program will work. But generally, how it works is all jurisdictions sign what we call a franchise agreement with their haulers, and with the exception of Port Hueneme and Oxnard, because they're their own haulers. They provide curbside collection services in Ventura County. All cities and the unincorporated area must comply. Residents must separate their food waste from their trash. We do have free kitchen pails that are available. If you don't have one, they're the countertop kitchen pails. You can hit me up after. There's a picture of it here in the left, I think, side of the screen to the left of the truck. Cities will give them out if you're a city resident. I think every city does. I'm not 100% sure. And the county has them as well. If you go to Earth Day events, you might be able to get some. They usually have them out to give out. Businesses must also provide organics recycling, both behind the scenes and in the front of house for customers. There are exceptions that apply based on size and conditions and volume produced. Now, that collected food waste will go to a permitted facility where the packaging is removed. Agrimin just recently opened up a new facility at their Mountain View location, and it is not the picture that is in the bottom left, but it essentially is looking like that. So the facility at Mountain View is really, for lack of for just dumbing it down, it's like a depackager. It can accept up to 300 tons of food waste. But the issues that we're finding in these industrialized systems, there's a lot of issues, but plastic contamination is one of the major ones that we're looking at. And then all of the food waste, regardless, it's going to come from your neighborhood. It's coming from the trucks. It's going to a transfer station. So in some cases, it goes to Del Norte. Some cases, it goes to Gold Coast. Some cases, it's going to that new Mountain View facility. But in every case, all of the rest of it is going out of the county right now because we do not have a certified high diversion facility that can process that. Industrial composting in this capacity will use one of two ways to deal with it. And food waste really is going to require an anaerobic digestion kind of process because so much of the volume. And so that's like I essentially call that like cooking the food waste, right? And some of it can go to wastewater treatment plants and other facilities, but basically they're creating a digestate that they can create biofuels from. Whereas aerobic composting comes in many forms. Aerated static piles are common. That's what you would see if you went to visit Agrimin's facility. And they produce more of like a mulch or compost. And the challenges are that it's messy and smelly for residents. It's expensive and complex for businesses. It's confusing for residences because we have so many different types of collection rules in the county, and long transport distances and limited processing and technology. So while we're building our infrastructure, it is taking time. And unfortunately, it's not the most efficient system for waste collection right now, but it's what we got. And so it's what we got to work with. So when I started this journey, gosh, I was working in food waste and recovery. God, I feel like my first waste audit with youth was in like 2010. Um, the EPA had provided this food recovery hierarchy. You may have seen it before, and it's basically just giving direction saying this is our most preferred and our least preferred way to dispose. And I never did like this pyramid actually very much because the one thing that drove me the most angry about it was that they put composting below industrial uses. And I never thought that that was the way we should do it. Well, then in 2022, when they changed the law, they came up with this U-shaped thing, which I think is even worse, but at least they put compost ahead of industrial uses. My dream would be to have a circular system. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If we can, put in food hubs and shorten that supply chain and keep more food locally and figure out decentralized ways to deal with our food waste that does occur and keep it locally. Think about that. Think about the millions of tons of food that is grown in the county, all that water, all that nutrients, it gets shipped out of the county. And then our food waste is the same thing. All of that nutrients with all of that water, all of that energy, we're shipping it out of the county. It blows my mind. So if we can come up with more circular systems, I think that's where we're trying to move. The only other thing I would say about these pyramids is the other thing we're missing is what we were talking about in this other slide back here is the removal of plastic. So in these large scale industrial programs, we are seeing plastic contamination continue to be an issue. And so that is going to be another thing that we're going to have to look at. An example, a really good example of a local kind of very small example of a food hub I'd like to share is like the Ventura County Farm to School program. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but that program links up directly with farmers who sell their produce to local schools who've decided to sign a contract with them. And so that is a perfect example of keeping that food as local as possible. And then they may or may not have, in many cases they do, they have an on-site, composting or garden program. And so that is an example of circularity that we'd like to get at. And it doesn't have to be big and massive. That's the whole point. The circularity can have at a very small scale and still be effective when you're thinking about like the culmination effect of more and more people doing this themselves. So there's more reasons why backyard composting is better. As I mentioned, the plastics contamination. Again, I'll share the link for the source of this information. In 2024, Composting Consortium analyzed feedstock from finished product. The feedstock and finished product from 10 composting facilities and found that 85% of the contamination detected at those facilities was conventional plastic. So we're talking about things like rigid film, rigid plastics, film plastic, composite plastics, and even compostables. Now, 4 in 10 composters reported trace amounts of plastic in the finished product. Many had contamination irrespective of whether they were accepting pre or post consumer. It didn't matter. Everybody had some noticeable amounts of contamination. And 8 out of 10, though, interestingly, who accepted compostable plastics had 0 to a very minute trace of contamination in their finished product. So that actually gives us a little bit of sheds a light on some opportunities, some challenging realities, but that's actually kind of cool to hear that 8 out of 10 saw little to 0 contamination using compostable plastics. So I think that study lays the groundwork for future research and investment. And what's great is the state's also moving towards there's a new law called EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. It's focusing on plastics in the waste stream. I feel like that's going to also complement this SB 1383 law because we're going to be looking at those producers of plastic packaging they're going to have to form these producer responsibility organizations, pros, we call them, and they're going to have to deal with the waste that their product is producing. So we may see some synergy between these laws in the future. So maybe compost can't save the world, but I think we can do some pretty good things in our backyard. If we take the estimate that CalRecycle provides of 23 million tons of organic waste disposed annually, assuming 40% occurs at the consumer level, if you do a back of a napkin calculation, you're looking at like 560 pounds of household organic waste per person per year, about 1.5 pounds per person per day. That's easily compostable in a backyard composting system. So there's 3 phases usually in composting. And composting really requires 4 inputs: air, water, sunlight, and organic material. I guess time would be the 5th one, right? Air, water, sunlight, organic material, and time. By measuring and modifying those inputs, you can speed or slow or heat or cool or otherwise control the conditions in the pile and what your final output is. So it's typically divided into 3 phases. The mesophilic stage is dominated by the bacteria, and they get into that compost heap. And it even starts with the mold that starts on when you start to see that, that's the beginning, right? We're looking at that bacteria is taking over and it's going to it's going to start to create heat. And if you're somebody who's looking at that like from a very like scientific, if you're like below 40 degrees, you're still in cold composting, but anything getting up over 40, you're starting to get into hot compost. At the thermophilic stage, that's when the heat will increase, and that's when the bacteria can take over and they're really creating that pile. And you're going to want to start to see temperatures hovering in the 140 degrees area. And once it gets to the maturing stage, that thermophilic bacteria has used up most of the proteins and the fats and the carbs. And now it enters this maturing stage, and some of that tougher material can still be broken down by physical decomposers. I tend to cold compost, and so my output is really, it's a lot chunkier. I'm constantly recycling the bigger chunks that don't break down. It doesn't bother me. I bet you, I've just went over and visited some folks who were really working on a hot compost pile, and I was impressed with how fast it's working. If you're interested, you could check it out. You would reach out to the Satakoy Food Hub. There is a California Climate Action Fellow who's working on a project over there, and she's receiving the food donations that come in, the stuff that gets spoiled, they're composting, and she's actually recording it. So she's recording volume, she's recording the temperature, she's recording outputs. And I just think it's an interesting little study. I can't wait to see how it comes out. And she's a fabulous person to get to know. But 1 teaspoon of garden compost might contain 100 million bacteria, more than 100 million bacteria, and over 800 feet of those fungal threads, or mycelia. If you know anything about mycelia, that's the fungal network that works underground. Um, so one thing that we do, if anyone's going to be doing education, I meant to bring an example and I didn't, but I went out and bought like these just, clear plastic containers. And when I go out and do an event, what I do is I fill one container with like food, rotten food. I fill the next one with processing compost, right? So you can kind of see it broken down in there, maybe add a few worms if they'll survive the event. And then I provide finished compost. And what I love to do is I love to make the people smell the rotten food because it's gross and it has like an ammonia gross smell, and they get all gross. And then I talk about it processing. And then the final one, I have them smell the compost, and they're always tentative, but it doesn't stink. It smells like earth. And I feel like that's a very good way to teach people about the value of compost and how to break it down, because then they start to realize, oh my God, this is like actually soil. Wow, from my food waste. Wow. These are 6 examples. I think they're kind of like the biggest, broadest examples of composting. I'm sure there's variations and there may be other ways. And of course, there's, products that you can buy to help with composting. But these are like the 6 main ways. I've done at least all of them with the exception of bokashi, and I'm very interested in trying it. I'd be curious to know if anyone here on the call has actually tried it. Like I said, I don't tend to do hot composting because I'm lazy. Cold composting seems to work. I don't know, I get a 5 gallon bucket or so every, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a year. That's good enough for me. We do have a great vermicomposting demonstration at the Hall of Administration, or the Government Center. We do tours. There will be potentially tours on Earth Day this year. If you're interested, reach out to me. My friend, if you know David Goldstein, he writes the Eye on the Environment column, and he's been running a vermiculture project at the Government Center for decades. So it's really kind of cool to see the longevity of his project there. Um, Trench and sheet composting remind me a lot of what my grandparents and my parents did back in Pennsylvania in their victory gardens, they called them. We just did that every year. You would have a pot, you would have a spot right next to your garden, and you would throw your vegetable stuff over there, and then that would be your garden plot for the next year, and flip-flop back and forth. Bokashi is interesting to me because I don't know if anyone else is experiencing this, but I find the city program, the county program, disgusting. I have a small house. I separate my veggie scraps and I compost them in the backyard, but I can't put, meat and dairy and all that. And that's the grossest part that comes out. And I don't have a place to store it. Like, you can't keep it in that kitchen pail for a week. It's disgusting. So I'm looking into bokashi because it's a fermentation and it stays in a closed bucket. So I'm curious to see if that's gonna, I don't know if it's gonna work out.
We have a master gardener, Jill,
Yeah.
Davita Cooper.
Yes, I met her. Is she doing it?
Yeah, she does that at home and she teaches some of our composting classes. But she actually practices it.
I know I got a chance to meet with her and talk to her when I was there, and yes,
Yeah.
she's doing some good stuff. So
Yeah.
that's cool. So pile management, I think, is relatively straightforward. Like I said, this California Action Fellow, she's utilizing these tools because she wants to make it sort of scientific in a sense, right? Um, so you can look at your pile with a thermometer and sort of monitor your temperatures, and then again you have the power between air, sunlight, water, material, and time. You decide whether it needs adding more greens or browns to kick up that heat. What do you need to do to make that heat go up? You want to make sure that it's not too moist, and this is especially true with vermiculture. The vermiculture bins can get really, really moist. So you got to constantly be measuring them to make sure that they really just feel like a wrung out sponge. Oxygen levels, you don't need to get an O2 monitor because, again, you're going to know when you pull up to the pile. If it stinks, then you know you got an oxygen problem. I think pH testing is interesting. Maybe that's something that a gardener would be more interested in. You can also send your compost out to be tested if you want. I don't think that UCA&R, they used to do stuff like that, right? Like the Cooperative Extension used to do stuff, but I don't think they do that anymore. I don't know. You'd have to tell me. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance is a great resource for composting. I will again provide this link. They just provide 10 little tips, and most of these are common sense. A few of them actually kind of caught my attention. Obviously, do not add meat, dairy, fats, oils, cooked, mixed, gross food into your pile. It's just going to cause problems. Keep that for the curbside program. Mix and deeply incorporate those materials. Don't just stick it on top of the pile. Cover it with a very thick layer of mulch or browns and get that added into your pile. What is a smart thing to do is a lot of times when I'm pruning in my yard or I'm ripping out like the mountain of nasturtiums that I got to deal with, I'm piling that to the side. I'm dumping all my food waste there, and I'm taking an axe and I'm chopping, and I'm just chopping and breaking that stuff in before I incorporate it into my bin. I like this one, maintaining. I don't have 3 feet of space around my bins, but it does make sense because if you can keep clear space out around your bins, you can, you're eliminating hiding habitat for rodents. And also, this one I hadn't thought of, a firewise best practice. We really need to keep our that zone 0
Mhm.
clean. And so if you have a compost pile, you want to make sure that it's all clean around it. I literally had friends in Tahoe in winter, their house caught on fire from their compost bin. So it's real. Um, Turning piles regularly and moving them regularly again disturbs habitat for critters, so they're not going to want to be in there. Um, I mentioned shredding and breaking that down. I've also heard that if you're having issues with rodents, you could try some citrus peels, some pungent herbs, or some spices. There is a product that I did try that is supposedly non-toxic that is just capsicum, which is a pepper, and you can sprinkle that around sometimes, and it will deter pests from coming in. And I can also provide a link, a follow-up link from I think it's the Institute for Local Self-Reliance or California sorry, LA Compost. They have a specific set of criteria for dealing with pests. Uh, and then if all else fails, you can try some humane traps as a last resort. Don't use poison. And if it just gets that bad, I would just stop and like scratch it and start over again. Like if you're having these problems, just stop and just start over again would be my recommendation. Using compost, again, I would rather defer to the expert gardeners that we have here in this cohort, but definitely compost can help improve soil structure. You can add compost to your beds. Fall is often the best time, or maybe late fall. Um, so you can add that. California natives are going to want less compost. They're not going to want it every year, and they're not going to want it regularly throughout the season. So be careful about how much compost you're putting in and around the natives. They don't necessarily need that. You can mix it in with potting soil, although if you haven't gotten to a hot, I wouldn't recommend using it for seed starting in potting soil if you didn't get your temperature up to kill any sort of pathogens. But it suggests that if you did do that, you could use that at mixing it with your potting soil. You can make compost tea. There's recipes online. The worm bins are going to give you a dedicated liquid that you need to dilute, whereas the other compost, you would make it like a tea. So you're going to mix it at a certain ratio that they provide for you. You have to dilute it because that concentrated fertilizer can actually act like a herbicide. It can kill things. And you do want to use it immediately once you mix it. You don't want to keep it and hold on to it. Um, I've seen applications, and in fact, actually, I never did find out the results of this, but Agerman was working with the City of Ventura Parks Department to show how you can use it with scattering over turf to help with soil quality, aeration, and water conservation activities. I'd actually have to look and see what were the results of that. But that was like a study they did like a year or two ago to sort of promote the idea of compost use. And then again, putting it in your flower beds, sprinkling it over the lawn, scattering it over lawns. And I would say, like in Natalie's presentation, where she's talking about putting her mulch beds in and around that drip line, that might be an interesting place to incorporate some of your compost outputs. And I would actually defer to someone else to see if that would be a smart idea to mix that in with the mulch. So where can you get it locally? Again, this is information based off unincorporated, right? So your cities are going to maybe have different information, but you can call and get it order. You can order it from Agerman or Ojai Valley Organics or Peach Hill Soils. But we also have a program for the unincorporated areas. So residents, and most cities do this as well, you can get free compost and mulch in certain areas. So there's actually some folks we have contracts with EJ Harrison in Athens. If you're in their service area, they actually do have a delivery program, a coupon delivery program. You have to pay for the fee, but you get the product. Um, if you're working with schools or nonprofit organizations, please reach out to me because we have a program where we can cover the cost of sometimes the product and the delivery. Um, and this is actually something I'm looking at as a part of my job to do this recovered organic waste program to expand it is I want to look into working with educational farms like, I guess there's like Mesa Farms and Poco Farms, and I'm sure there's others, SEAG, so on and so forth, that would be interested in maybe hosting, events, a weekend where we drop off huge loads of compost and mulch and have a giveaway. So again, if this is a project that Master Gardeners are interested in getting involved in, please reach out. Maybe there's some magic that we can do together. So I wanted to talk about electric machines because they are out and about. I will provide
Jill,
this link as what?
I'm sorry, can we stop and answer a few questions before you move
Oh,
into a new
sh
area?
sure, 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 sure.
Okay, so Mike is asking, don't static compost piles still produce CO2?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could even say that there might be there might be methane coming out of this, that's the truth of the matter. But I would say, are you saying that in the sense of we're producing carbon? We're not producing carbon anywhere to the amount that an industry is doing. Is that the question,
Mike?
or does he mean carbon as in carbon sequestration?
He's going to answer.
Well, yes, I was more I was more interested in carbon sequestration.
Okay, yes, for sure. That's another benefit. I forgot to mention that if you think about the recovered organic waste program, so per SB 1383, the county is required to procure a certain amount based on our population of this recovered organic waste that's being produced. And that's why we have the coupon program. That's why we have the programs that we do with Agrimin, where we actually redeposit, we provide this compost to farmers because it is a carbon sequestration benefit. So not only are we improving soil quality and we're, helping with water retention and all these wonderful things, and we're creating a closed loop and we're helping take the organic waste out of the landfill. Gosh, it does sound Pollyanna, doesn't it? We're also doing carbon sequestration. Does that answer?
Well, I was kind of wondering, like, if you threw your organic waste out on the ground and exposed to sun and air, as opposed to composting it, how much CO2 reduction would you get by composting in a relative sense, like percentage?
I don't know, and I feel like that's like a researcher question, and it may be something that a researcher's looking at in the UC system. You might be
Yeah.
surprised if you went onto UCA&R or UC and look. I bet you somebody's studying that, but I do not know.
I'll check it out. Thank you.
Okay, and so there's some folks that are concerned about the plastic issue, and then why we're being asked to put our kitchen scraps in plastic.
I know. Isn't that the most frustrating thing? Again, it goes back to the fact that we do not have a high diversion facility. So how it works, um, like right now, Agrimin has been operating in the county and they've been able to process our green waste, right? They never mixed food waste into the green waste. So there are laws that prevent that mixing of green waste and food waste in a aerated static pile type um, facility, and they don't have the permit to turn the operation into what we need to be able to process that.
Mm.
So we're going to see a video at the end here that's really going to explain that a little bit better, and you're going to see a lot of details. Probably explain it better than I can right now. But the reason why we have to put it in a plastic bag is because they have to separate it from the green waste because legally that food waste cannot enter the current facility that we have to manage it.
Okay. I remember this was a problem years ago and they still haven't solved it, huh? Somebody here is saying, oh, you can use paper bags.
Yeah, I think you have to look online and I know I can't remember, but I think no, I think Athens will say a translucent or clear bag placed on top. And I think EJ Harrison is saying any bag will do placed on top. Um, and again, it comes down to if you use the paper bag, yeah. You know what I use are those the compostable produce bags that we're now getting at the
Yeah.
grocery stores. And I'm finding that they're lasting a week. They're not breaking by the time I'm able to throw it somewhere. They're actually working. And they break down in my compost bin, even cold composting. I have to run them through the cycle like one or twice, once or twice, but they break down.
Okay, that's good to know. Um, how do you increase the temperature in a small backyard compost bin?
I mean, I personally have never been able to get my bin up to a higher temperature because I said I'm lazy, I'm busy, and I'm not dealing with it. I just cold compost works. But what I'm seeing when I'm working with other folks and what I just witnessed over at the Sataquai Food Hub is it's turning. So it's that air. It's the amount that you're putting in and it's the ratio of browns to greens. And
Hmm.
you're going to manage that yourself. I mean, there's rules out there that say, what is it? It's 30 to 1. I actually have to look back. Um, but you're going to manage that. You're going to figure it out. You got to get intimate with your pile.
Right, I agree with that because even the master gardeners at Herrick who have a pretty big compost situation happening out there, um, like they know from working with it, we need more grain waste or we need more brown or
Mhm.
like, yes, there's guidelines to get you started, but they will modify
Yeah.
to get it to do what they want it. What are your thoughts on um vermiposting? Citrus,
Vermicomposting.
onions, chili.
Yeah. David, my vermicomposting guru would say citrus is okay, limit it. Um, Onions, limited. I wouldn't put like a whole thing of onions in a worm bin. I mean, I just don't really, ugh. But chili skins, seeds. Phew. I mean, I guess I would
What are you
kind of
trying to do
maybe,
to your worms, Gary?
yeah.
They're just tiny little things. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, I had
I
heard
wouldn't
don't
think of
use
certain,
any of those, so I don't. And I have a great vermicompost. I just wanted to hear the next
yeah.
opinion. So
I
You
wouldn't. I just
you
wouldn't.
concur, and David Goldstein concurs. So thank
Yeah.
you.
All right. Everybody's happy. Okay, just
Yeah.
a few more. Somebody asked about electric composters. You're going to cover that. Natalie
Natalie.
said in mulch basins for gray water, it is best practice to only have mulch in there. It eventually turns into compost and needs to be replaced by chunky mulch.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, did they okay bio sludge to be used in the composting companies? They were
Mm.
looking into it 20 years ago.
And so, Marianne, if I think we're speaking the same language, biosludge would be what I call digestate, and I think that's what you're talking about. Like at a wastewater treatment facility, when they bring, when our poo goes down to the wastewater treatment facility, there's the first room, which is the screening room, where all the grody, like, I mean, tons of like trash and logs and all that debris gets screened out. And then you got the dirty, poopy water. And then they put it into this thing that dries out the solids. And then they go and then that's how they treat the liquid. I don't know if you've ever gotten to go on a tour of the wastewater treatment facility, but I highly recommend it. It's super fascinating. But the biosolids, that dry biosolids, used to be able to be applied to farm fields as a fertilizer. And sometimes they use it as what they called alternative daily cover at the landfills, but that is no longer allowed. Um, per all of the new waste laws. So again, that idea, some communities send their food waste, they take that sludge and they send it to the wastewater treatment facility. And we are our facilities are just older. They don't have the capacity to do it. Oxnard's facility is the only one right now in the county that has the potential because they have like two extra, I forget what they call those things, the big towers. They have two more of those digesters that are, I think one or both are offline. And if they had the capital to be able to invest in that, then we could be doing that, but we don't have it. Oxnard at Del Norte, they have a 10 extra acres. They could put a facility on those 10 extra acres and they haven't done it. And they
So
actually
where's
could tie right into the gas line. If they were producing a biofuel,
right?
they could tie right into the gas line there. Like it goes right through there. It's capital. I don't know why it's not happening quicker. Permitting issues.
Yeah, I mean, we need to get on this. I'm going to write a strongly worded letter to someone.
Yeah.
Okay, and then somebody, Carol, who's a experienced master gardener, I think Carol, you're referring to how to get your temperature up. She said add grass.
Oh, yeah. Like again, it's that balance between the browns and the greens, right?
Right. Okay, I think that covers it.
Cardboard, I see cardboard in here. Yes. And cardboard's great for the worm bins, I find, because it's very absorbent, because my worm bin tends to get too wet. So I find that to be helpful. Golden? All right. Onward. All right, this is fun. I found this article when I was researching putting this together, and I never really have talked about the electric composters before. I want to try one really bad, but I've also had some friends tell me their personal experiences. So this author spent 6 months testing six different food recyclers, including like the Lomi, the Mill, the Food Cycler, and then another version I'd never heard of, the Ethereal. Um, they sent their compost to an agricultural lab for testing. They conducted plant germination studies, growth tests in her basement. She talked with numerous experts and she even started a worm bin in her apartment. And then she compared all of these devices, and this is what she came up with. Some of the environmental claims are overblown or dubious. They produce not compost, but dehydrated food scraps, which are easier to store and can then be added to your compost pile. But if you were to spread that out outside, just on the ground, it would probably attract unwanted critters. And if you put it directly on your plants, just like that undiluted compost tea, your plants may suffer or die. Um, so even when you're following the instructions, so you just have to sort of be careful about that. Well, whatever. But apparently chickens really like it. Um, and then the final conclusion, which I think is really funny, is she's saying if you really want to be green and sustainable, you're just better off wasting less food, starting a backyard compost bin, and looking for community compost options in your community. So I thought that was a funny like conclusion. I thought it matched what we were talking about today. Another cool thing that's happening with the waste-free VC and what we're bringing into the county in terms of edible food recovery, I just found out that this Carrot app that we're talking about, that there's a effort, a good friend of mine in the county, Pat Brown, is actually working on an initiative to train and promote the idea of animal people who have like urban backyards. They have urban, I call them urban homesteads. They may be having chickens or ducks or guinea pigs or whatever they're feeding their critters in their backyard. They're able to now, we're getting them into that waste stream, and they're picking up the animal feed. So if we go back to that pyramid, like we're not wasting food, we're donating food, we're rescuing and recovering, donating food. Now we're looking at animal feed recovery, then composting. So I think there's some exciting things happening in that. And this Carrot app, apparently, I haven't tried it yet. I just found out this morning that it can be used. So if you're gleaning and getting any kind of produce, maybe you linked up with a food pantry in your neighborhood that has to pay that disposal cost. That's the problem. These food pantries, these small mom and pop food pantries, are getting overrun with this food, and by the time it gets to them, it's spoiled, and they have to pay the disposal cost. So if we could link more of these food pantries up with backyard composters and gardeners, we might be able to solve, just to take a little steam off of that's coming out. Apparently, this Carrot app might be able to help you track that, which I think is kind of cool, and might be able to link you up with people who are getting rid of material or who need material. That's sort of the next evolution. Okay. So community composting is on the horizon. So after the law, SB 1383 came in and all the jurisdictions were scrambling and we don't have the right kind of capacity or facilities to manage all of this waste, they realized after cities and jurisdictions were complaining, there was a new law that was enacted called SB 2346, which actually gives jurisdictions more flexibility in how we meet our procurement targets, which includes investing in community composting. So I highly recommend, I'll provide the link. The city of Pasadena has a great program. It's their bins are modeled off of LA Compost, but they put in bins in 8 of their parks in 8 of the supervisor districts. And this is this 3-bin system. And if you go onto their website, you'll find that they have a simple online little tutorial and quiz, and that's how you get access to the codes to use their facilities. Now, they're not diverting tons of food waste and they're not producing tons of compost, but what they are producing is goodwill. They have education going on in their community. These look great in the parks. They have signage, and I'm hoping we actually have a meeting next month with the head of the library system, because we're kind of posting this idea of, could we put these at the library so people go to get a book, they drop off their food waste, they get some compost. I mean, we're kind of trying to play with that idea. We don't know. I personally have been tasked with growing community composting in our community. So if any master gardeners have any projects that they want to work on, please reach out to me. I think we could do some magic. It's just a little intimidating to try to do it for the county all by myself. So I'm always looking for people that want to get involved. Oh, and I will share an interview. Actually, I'm going to share an interview in a link with my friend Pat, who is doing this animal feed rescue, and it'll give you a better idea if you want to watch that interview. Also, I highly recommend the California Resource Recovery Association has a technical council. It's called CORC, and now I'm not remembering what that stands for. Compost California something, recyclers and composters. It's a consortium or a working group that anyone can join, and they talk about compost. That's all they do, is talk about compost, and I'll throw that link in the chat if anyone's interested. And so this is the video that we can watch. Again, it's going to be about, it's focused on LA County, but everything that's in here is basically the same as to what's happening in Ventura. So I think, don't we have to, Kathy, just so I'm sure, do we have to hit something that says play the sound when we do this? Do we know? I think I have to come up here and I have to say something like,
Yeah, Natalie
maybe.
just turned up her volume, I think, right, Natalie?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just played it, but then it was very loud here, but I think you all needed it that loud.
I don't know. Let's see what happens. I'm going to hit this. If it turns out awful, please let me know.
The beef industry has long used scientific principles as
We
the
good?
foundation for everything that we do.
Little louder.
I want to make sure that we can raise cattle next year better than we did last year.
Louder.
Louder.
Dinner.
It feels really warm, kind of lukewarm.
So if it gets too hot, the microorganisms die, then the composting process stops.
Hi, I'm Karen Garcia, a reporter with the Los Angeles Times, and we are here at the Recology Compost Facility outside of Bakersfield, and this is where a bulk of the City of LA's green waste turns into compost.
Jill?
A third of what gets sent to landfills
We're looking at your
is actually
PowerPoint
organic
now.
waste. As it decomposes, it creates methane. California's solution was to enact SB 1383, which requires every city and community in the state to begin diverting organic waste away from landfills.
And so what's happening here is as the material comes in, it comes in its raw form, so it's not sized, and it's just different pieces, and it's, grass clipping, leaves, trees, branches, and now most recently, residential food waste. The trucks get offloaded, we then pick it up, we run it through the grinder, the Peterson grinder, and then basically what we're doing is we're sizing it. So we're taking the bigger material, we're making it to be 6 inches or less.
And what is the benefit of the sizing?
We basically helped us start the composting process, just trying to speed up what nature already does. And so once we grind and size the material, then at that point we pick it up, we truck it out here, and we start to build what's known as windrow. So essentially it's just a big row of material. We're adding water to it to get the water level up to about 50-60% moisture content. And then once that happens, we come through and turn it.
Oh, wow. That is really hot. It's super hot. Yeah.
All of the micro have released all of the nutrient to get into the soil and fertilize the soil. It's fantastic.
So you saw where the material first came in, where it comes in raw. From there we size it, and then we pick it up, we put it out in the windrows. After the 90-day process, we screen it. So what we're doing is we're screening the finished product, the compost itself, and on average we see about a 50-50 ratio. So let's say of every ton that comes in, it produces a half a ton of compost. And we can walk over there too, so you can get a better view of it as well.
You can feel how moist it is.
Yeah, much different. First, I'll start by asking about SB 1383.
SB 1383 is looking at diverting food waste away from landfills and creating this beneficial compost that then goes back to close the cycle, reduce greenhouse gases, promote healthier soil, healthier food, and basically get the benefit of placing the banana peel or the apple core or the leftovers from your plate, placing it into your green bin as opposed to your trash can. The City of LA launched its organics program, and we're basically now encouraging residents to recycle all of their organic waste through the green bin. So residents have historically recycled and processed all of their yard waste, so grass, tree trimmings, branches, leaves, but now we're expanding the program to all food waste as well. So basically we started providing residents with these kitchen countertop pails for them to collect their food scraps in their kitchen. And then of course, the pail is just to make it more convenient for residents. You don't need to get this exact pail. People are using Tupperware, buckets, any other container to just kind of collect your food scraps throughout the week and then get them into the green bin.
So what goes in? What can I toss into my pail and then toss into my green bin?
A common misconception is people think it's only fruits and vegetables, but through this new curbside program, you can compost all organic waste, all food waste. So that includes things like meat, bones, cheese, grain. So paper towels, napkins, food soiled paper can all go into the bin as well. A question a lot of people have about the pail is how do you keep it clean? So you can use a clean paper towel to line it, or you can use a paper bag to help kind of collect or keep all that material consolidated, so long as they're not waxed, coated, or lined. Another product that is thankfully now recyclable through the green bin is greasy cardboard. So I would rip off this portion that's clean so that it can go into the blue bin to be recycled with other cardboard and clean paper.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that shouldn't be going in there?
There are some like food related items that people might put in, so like rubber bands or twisty ties from like your produce. Produce stickers, you should make sure to take those off of the fruit.
Where does it go? What happens to that compost after it's gone through the facility and the processing? Where does it end up?
Yeah, so primarily the compost is being marketed back to the agricultural industry. So you're bringing the food scraps back to where it already came from. So kind of creating that circularity where your food isn't going to the landfill and just rotting and producing all these negative greenhouse gases. You're returning those nutrients back to the soil where the food was created in the first place.